its quest to follow the Tea Party mandate of fiscal conservatism, the Republican leadership made this bold pledge. You ready? Cut back spending to 2008 levels. 2008! Just 3 years ago, when spending under George W. Bush was already out of control. Here now, my freedom fighters, Fox Business Network's Charles Payne, radio host Leslie Marshall, and Loyola University economics professor Dan D'Amico. Leslie, I have to go to you first. I think you predicted it. You may have predicted it right here on Freedom Watch, that the big government Republicans would co-opt or devour the Tea Partiers. Is that what has happened here? If the Republican Party in lockstep is going to say, okay, Mr. President, we'll raise your debt ceiling by $1 trillion, just don't spend more than George Bush did in 2008 when he was running deficits at $500 billion a year.
Oh, Judge, I'm so glad that you asked me about this because, yes, I made this prediction. And by the way, they're trying to do this to offset. It's sort of like, don't notice we're raising the debt ceiling because we're slashing left and right over here. This, quite frankly, first of all, Judge, I've never understood why the GOP kowtows to the Tea Party. No offense to the Tea Party. They're not the majority of their supporters, their party, or, of course, the congressional members in the House and the Senate. But second of all, it does, to me, it sends a very mixed message, regardless of political ideology, because they're not keeping their promises entirely. And lastly, to go backward to 2008 in 2011, to me, is not only counterproductive, it just doesn't make sense.
Or Charles, did they just pull 2008 out of the blue? I mean, why did they pick that year, which was perhaps the worst year of George Bush's presidency with respect to matters economic?
I think they put a finger in the wind and kind of figured that's where they could go. To the point that, are they kowtowing to the Tea Party? They do owe the Tea Party, I think, the fact that they are the majority. I think they owe that 100% to the Tea Party. Right. By the same token, though, these are a lot of them dyed-in-the-wool Washington politicians, and a lot of them are intimidated and afraid. They don't know where to start. This whole plan sounds hokey. You're going to take away from Pell Grants and nurses training, go after defense, go after Veterans Affairs, go after the tough places and entitlement programs.
Get rid of education, commerce, and agriculture.
You got to do the tough stuff. They don't want to do the tough stuff, and that's why I agree with Leslie.
Professor D'Amico, this doesn't even make any sense, does it, from Basic Economics 101? Mr. President, we'll let you borrow another $1 trillion as long as you spend a little bit less than you planned on spending. Go back to what George W. Bush was spending when he borrowed $1 trillion in 2008. I mean, this is absurd, isn't it?
You're right. The partisan element in these midterm elections doesn't necessarily mean less spending. It's going to mean a different type of spending. And I think that the protection of things like the Pentagon and Homeland Security and these things in these rounds of bills reflect that. Republicans are okay with spending so long as you're spending on things that they like, the military, etc. I think that the problem
I must
here is
be doing something wrong here. I have a prominent businessman and commentator that I work with every day. I have a prominent Democrat. I have a prominent libertarian economics professor, and we're all agreeing. Leslie, would you agree with this, that John Boehner would be the minority leader and Nancy Pelosi would be the Speaker of the House if the Tea Party had not supported the additional candidates that it got in and gave the Republicans the majority in the House? And if you agree with that, shouldn't John Boehner give them something in return?
No. I don't. I honestly think that what the Tea Party did is the Tea Party helped with the momentum to give out information and misinformation regarding health care reform and to really rile people up to say, look, this isn't working, take our country back, and that type of thing. The Tea Party was helpful, but I think the GOP did a fair job on their own. And quite frankly, the Democrats didn't in giving proper information and combating that take our country back message.
Who will take Republicans seriously ever again, Charles, if they blow this opportunity to stop the president from borrowing and to stop the president from spending? He can't do anything without an affirmative vote of the House.
This is their last chance. I disagree with Leslie 1,000%. Momentum, the Tea Party started the momentum. The GOP was DOA, period. If it was not for the Tea Party, the GOP would be on the sidelines 100% watching the show. Having said that, they've got a 2-year window of opportunity, and they better prove themselves.
All right, guys, hang out during the break. Remember when we heard the U.S. would make money off the General Motors bailout? Surprise, surprise. Turns out not so much. More with my freedom fighters. I don't think they'll agree on this one. Next. Did you get your hopes up after some in the government claimed taxpayers would make money off of General Motors after the bailout? Think again. A federal panel says the United States government will not recoup all $81 billion it invested in General Motors, mostly because the stock was sold at too low of a price. So who made money with the U.S. selling at too low of a price? The banks, of course. Back to my freedom fighters, Payne, Marshall, and D'Amico. Charles, to you first. Government invests $81 billion. Some in the Bush years through outright grants and loans. Some in the Obama years through the crazy bankruptcy that favored the UAW and disfavored the bondholders. The government makes back about $30 billion. Will it ever get back that $50 billion? Stated differently, can General Motors stock ever sell for nearly twice what it sold for so that the government can recoup our tax dollars that it put in?
It's unlikely, but I don't like the narrative being made out that way. In other words, will it be okay if we do recoup it? Let's just say somehow the average car in America is 10 years old, the car market goes crazy around the world, and the stock goes up. It still should not have been done in the first place, and this is what bothers me, because most people in America feel like we've already been paid back.
Why should, Professor D'Amico, the government never have invested in General Motors or any private business, no matter what the return on the government's dollar?
Well, it's clear as day that the return wasn't going to be there because people don't value these cars nor these stocks at high value because they're not buying them. The government doesn't have any extra information that ordinary people don't have. Ordinary people know that GM cars are ugly and get back gas mileage, and they know that the stocks aren't worth a damn.
All right, when GM did its IPO, Leslie Marshall, it only allowed the federal government, the Treasury Department owns 79% of the stock, selected investors to buy money. Some of them got in early. This happened over a 2-day period, and they bought at 29 and they sold at 31. I think maybe it went up to 32 at the most. Today, the government says that GM stock would have to go up to $53 a share in order for taxpayers to get their money back. These fellows are telling me it's never going to go that high. Question, was it a good thing or a bad thing for the federal government to take our tax dollars and put it into a failing business?
Well, I don't think General Motors is a failing business when you look at the numbers this year in sales compared to last year. And also, I think being that nearly 80% as an owner, which the federal government and we the taxpayers are, the federal government has to look at the course going forward of General Motors with the design of the vehicle, certainly the mileage, looking at energy efficiency, hybrid vehicles, which they've done better with sales this year. And I think going forward, recoup, if you can, as much, obviously, of that money. I prefer bailing out someone like GM to Wall Street, personally, as a taxpayer.
Professor D'Amico, what would have happened if we just had let GM die the way the government did with Lehman Brothers? It just went away.
We'd have a more competitive auto industry. When you subsidize industries simply for the sake of employment or simply for the sake of too big to fail arguments, you end up with products and services that aren't really functional or useful. It's no different from building roads to nowhere.
I know from listening to our buddy Gasparino that the politicians are bought and paid for by Wall Street.
Right.
But what does Wall Street really think of an improvident investment like this? $81 billion of taxpayer dollars. Did anybody downtown think that the taxpayers would get all their money back?
No, I don't think Wall Street doesn't care about that. Listen, the stock is trading recently. About 5 or 6 firms actually put a buy rating on it. You know, for Wall Street, it's a great vehicle to trade the market. They're going to do, to your point, they're going to do very well. They made a lot of money orchestrating the IPO in the first place. It's fantastic for Wall Street. It's Main Street that continues to lose out on all of these bailouts.
How does the government decide who it will let to invest in this instrument? And everybody knew whoever bought at 9 in the morning would sell out for a few dollars more at 3 in the afternoon. Well, how did the government pick and choose who got to do that?
It helped if you were Chinese, you know, a Chinese sovereign fund or a Chinese wealth fund or a Middle Eastern wealth fund. It's really, really sad that people with accounts at discount firms like Schwab and Ameritrade didn't get a bite at the apple.
Leslie Marshall, isn't the real reason this was done was so that the president could pay back his buddies in the United Auto Workers?
Well, certainly every politician, the president is not an exception to that, has to look at who his supporters have been. But remember, what's one of the things America said to this president? We need you to create jobs. You do not want the auto industry to go down. And by the way, we taxpayers have a responsibility. We're the consumers.
Well, we're not talking
we
about
can
the
choose
auto
to buy
industry
American
anyway.
or GM cars or not.
All right, real quick, we only have about 30 seconds. Why is she wrong, Dan D'Amico? Why will this not create jobs in the long run?
jobs are not to be created. They have to be discovered. There's no recipe for job creation. It requires like on the ground level entrepreneurship, people starting new businesses, expanding existing businesses. Simply throwing money at rusted out, failing industries doesn't create jobs in the long run. Dan
D'Amico, Leslie Marshall, Charles Payne, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Back with the plain truth on the same old big government loving Republicans. Next.